Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
You got Luke.
Luke, we're piggybacking off of the smash hit miniseries of HBO, Chernobyl, to talk about what really happened there.
So, not using your HBO Go account.
No.
Because I wouldn't do that, and that's
No.
illegal.
Yes.
I watched like 2 or 3 episodes.
Okay.
And it was all right.
I watched all of it. The last episode, if anyone hasn't watched it yet, just watch the last episode. The first 4, meh.
How many episodes are there total?
5.
Oh, so I should
You could finish it.
I could skip
the last one actually does the maths.
Oh.
Well, maybe the sciences. And the
Okay.
other 4 are just kind of sad and shooting dogs.
Yeah,
So,
it,
spoiler alert.
it just seemed to me like from what I saw, it was just a bunch of really angry men chain smoking.
There was a lot of that.
It's just like, if you're not going to die of radiation, you're going to die from lung cancer from smoking. Because
Yeah,
literally,
faux show.
they all just were like, that's all they did was smoke.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, come on.
Okay.
All right. Chernobyl was the first ever nuclear power station built in the Ukraine. Did you know that?
I didn't know it was the first. I did
yeah,
not know
there
that.
you go. You can actually go there on a trip, though it's a highly regulated tour at this point.
Yeah.
But apparently tourism's booming there.
They said it's gone crazy since this HBO miniseries.
So I have some info. I thought I had some info. I have some info on that we can get into later on, though. So the basics of how a reactor works before we get into this.
Can I do before you get into that?
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
So Chernobyl,
yes,
as I say it, was a catastrophic nuclear accident that occurred on April 26th, 1986 at the number 4 reactor at the Chernobyl power plant. So what year were you born?
82.
82. So you probably don't remember this happening.
I don't know.
I actually remember
Do you?
when this happened because I was 11 years old.
Yeah, you were old.
Yeah,
You're that old?
I'm
Man.
44.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
You
so
just
I
turned old.
remember when this was happening, and this was the Cold War era, Russia's lying, and all this kind of crazy stuff. I specifically remember, like, everybody was afraid that, like, this nuclear cloud of fallout was going to come across the ocean and somehow affect us.
I feel like it probably did to
It
some
did,
extent.
but it wasn't.
Maybe
any-
not quite as much as they thought
Yeah.
it might. Yeah, well, that is scary.
Yeah, very scary.
Yeah, I don't like it.
No.
No. Can I get into my reactor
So
basics?
how does that reactor work?
Oh, thanks. Thanks for asking, Luke. Uranium fuel rods, this is super basic, by the way. Uranium fuel rods react to make all sorts of heat, right? And it turns water into steam.
Yep.
The steam drives large turbines.
Turbines. Very good.
Turbines. It's
Way
only
not-
taken me 150
way not to be
episodes.
offensive.
Thanks, to produce electricity. Control rods are used to slow down the reaction going between the uranium fuel rods and the cooling water, and the water is then pumped around the core to prevent it from overheating.
Yeah,
And it just lives in a happy balance forever.
That's what it does.
Right.
A happy balance of fission and fusion happening.
I don't think both of those are happening, Luke.
Yeah, one of them is happening. I
Check
don't
out-
know which one.
Check out our episode on fission versus fusion, and you will then understand what's happening. All right, some terms for you to understand.
Oh,
How about
no.
that?
Here we go.
Proton. Do you know what a proton
A
is?
proton is a very small, positively charged something.
Yeah, so it's like
it's an atom.
Yeah, it's the positively charged piece of the nucleus. The neutron is the neutral part of the nucleus. An isotope is the number of protons an atom has determines what element it will be. So the atom has a certain number of protons. This is the isotope. Unstable isotopes, they have too many or too few neutrons.
So they got to give it off.
So they shoot off these particles.
Pew, pew, pew.
Thank you. And once they shoot them off, they become more stable. So everybody's happy, right?
Sweet.
Radioactive decay.
Oh, that doesn't sound
doesn't
good.
sound good. That is the emitting of particles. So that this is one type of nuclear reaction. Another nuclear reaction is fission, Luke.
Fission.
Fission. Keep that in mind.
I knew that, James. I was just playing dumb.
I'm sure. Sorry. Okay. So fission is where an atom is broken into two. The leftover stuff, when the atom is broken, becomes energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is then turned into electricity. These two nuclear reactors are these two reactions are what happens in a reactor, and this is what we then use to produce energy to create our
The
electricity.
thing that I thought, I mean, and I think I knew this a while ago, but I just thought that you split an atom, the energy produced created electricity somehow. I didn't realize
Like magic.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it's actually steam
Yeah,
that
it's all that
actually
heat then.
right. So the water gets superheated, turns into steam. The steam moves the turbine, and then basically it's magnetic coils that actually produces the electricity. I just assumed that, like when I was a little kid, that you split an atom and it turns into, I can plug it into a wall socket all of a sudden.
Right. Well, you simplify it, it makes sense. But now as you're a very smart engineering type fellow, now you realize that's not how it works.
Yep.
So just a little bit more about what's going on there. Uranium-235, have you heard of it?
Yes.
So it's extra good at this process.
Very good.
It's like the bestest, which is why we use it. Usually we have to enrich said uranium, which would be uranium-238, to get it to be good enough to be this kind of stuff, since 235 is super rare. Super rare and super expensive.
We were talking about this. It's only it's something like it's
0.7%, I think,
of all of the uranium. It's less than 1%.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
What was that in our Curie episode?
Yeah.
Check that one out. That's a good one. So you enrich uranium-235 to make things happen, unless you're the USSR and you do stuff on the cheap.
Yeah.
So this is going to come into play here. So normally...
That was the whole thing with the reactor design, was it was meant to be the least expensive reactor. You could build a bunch of them. They could be cheap, easy to run. Just like, I feel like when you're dealing with nuclear energy, one of your edicts to design and engineering shouldn't be keep it cheap and keep it easy. It's like, let's make it safe. Let's make it effective.
I agree. And I mean, if something good came from this, I think the changes that have happened since,
much safer.
This was just a huge driver for that stuff, and not just for Russia, but around the world.
Yeah, worldwide, for sure.
So another thing about the safety and the cheapness that went into play here. Normally, when you have a nuclear reactor, you have something to go along with it called heavy water, right? So this is water which the hydrogen in the molecules is partially or completely replaced by an isotope deuterium, used especially as a moderator in nuclear reactors.
Slows stuff down.
Slowing stuff down, keeping stuff stable, right? Making it not blow up. What's good is that it helps to moderate the reaction because the reactor starts to get too hot. This heavy water evaporates and there's less of it, slowing down the reaction. But it's also very expensive.
Yeah.
Russia's like, we don't need no stinking
We're
heavy
gonna use
water.
light water.
Yeah, so the RBMK that you just mentioned used regular water, which is cheap, They have a lot of snow there. They got all sorts of water
in there and you're good.
Absolutely. So to make this work, graphite was used to slow down the neutrons as the moderator. And so I'm just assuming most of our listeners have watched Chernobyl, so they know graphite not good.
Yeah,
in this
it's that
situation.
piece that the one firefighter picked up, and then 30 minutes later, his hand was like, "Rah!"
Yeah, exactly.
Like Freddy Krueger hand.
Just like Freddy Krueger hand.
Yep.
Now, before we get into what went down in Chernobyl, now that you're nuclear reactor experts,
I feel like I'm a nuclear engineer right now.
you basically could be.
Just saying.
I thought about becoming one. I did
Ooh.
not. I was going to dual major, and they told me not to bother.
Okay.
Let's take a break for a word from our sponsor.
I'm guessing it's the state of Russia.
It is HBO. Thank you for
Ooh.
sponsoring us, for not sharing
Legally, I
passwords.
have to say you're lying.
I am not being sponsored by HBO, but I do have some shout-outs.
Shoot.
Jacob W.
Way to go, Jacob.
says, we are underrated, and a podcast this great should have more than 100 reviews. So go get on it, people.
Way to go.
Right?
I totally agree with him.
He would like an episode on Imagineering, so like the Disneys.
Ooh, that would be good.
So if any of you know an Imagineer that would like to talk to us and can explain to us theme parky things,
Ooh, that'd be pretty
get in
cool.
touch. But I do have good news for Jacob. We are now over 100 reviews. What? It's been a long time coming.
Yes, it has.
Mark H. also wrote in.
Good old Mark.
He had a couple of other inputs on batteries. Let's make it clear that we don't actually believe Teslas run on AA Duracells. We had no less than 3 or 4, I think 4 now, people write in to tell us that we were dumb for thinking that.
No. They don't. We didn't say they did. They were on something that's similar. It form factor. It looks like a AA.
Right.
They're a little bit bigger, and they're definitely not just a Duracell.
So he explained what was going on with that,
Thank you.
well as a number of people wrote in, including him and JP, to explain why rolling the batteries around in your remote, which I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, works. And that's because it removes the corrosion that forms. Like, it's just a small amount that forms between the batteries.
Okay.
And so that reestablishes that connection then.
Oh.
So thanks to all of you for that great input.
Nice.
And for sassing us about batteries.
No hate mail this time?
No hate mail this time. Made me feel good. I mean, there was a little bit of hate in there, but not a lot. If you do have hate mail, or you want to correct us, or you want to suggest some episodes, or you just want to say you love us, email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com.
Subscribe, listen, review.
Yeah, wherever you listen, Spotify, Podbean, iTunes, like most of you, go subscribe, go leave us a review. All that stuff.
If you have I said this before, and I'm going to say it again. If you have a smart device like a Siri or an Alexa or something like that,
that's true. Yeah.
All you have to do is say "play Unprofessional Engineering Podcast," and it'll grab the most recent one.
Very cool. So go do that. Listen, and if you want stickers, email us and let us know.
Pow.
All right, moving on.
So can we talk about like what actually happened? Or
I would love to talk about what actually happened.
So. Again, I didn't know any of this. I just assumed that there was a meltdown and it just blew up. But apparently, they were actually doing a safety test. At least this is the research I did, and I found there was a little bit of conflicting stuff in the research. But I think generally speaking, because I did go to a couple different sites, they were actually conducting a safety test, and it had to do with whenever the water would be low and different valves. And what happened was, whenever they were simulating a power outage, I believe, at least what all the different sites said, they were simulating a power outage, and they actually had certain safety protocols turned off, like these automatic water control systems where, like, if things went haywire, it would just dump a ton of water in it to keep it cool. So they had these off, and what happened was there was a primary explosion, which was a steam explosion. Because it got too hot, steam, superheats, explodes. After that primary explosion, there was a secondary explosion internally, and then this is whenever, like, the head of the reactor, like the top of the reactor, blew off the whole top of the building, and basically graphene or graphite or whatever you called it was, like, all over the place, and huge fire. Plumes of radioactive debris and smoke. Glowing. That was cool. That was very cool.
I mean, they thought it was cool till the cancers.
Until they all died of cancer.
Right.
So, so that's like super high level. I don't know if you have any more detail on that.
I feel like if I just let you run with this, we'd probably wrap up in like 4 minutes.
Yeah.
I think we should do that.
Okay.
Call it early day.
No, come on now.
Okay. So should I? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to go into my high level of the whole spiel and just skip over all the super details because they're hard on my head?
Yeah, we could try that.
Okay. So you mentioned it happened April 26th, 1986.
Yep.
Fun fact: this has nothing to do with anything.
Shoot.
Sublime. It's a band.
Okay.
They have a song, April 29th, 1992. It's about riots on the streets.
Oh.
Tell me, where were you? Anyways, but in the song, he says April 26th, 1992, even though it's titled April 29th. Boom.
Wow.
Think about that,
Mind
Sublime
blown.
fans.
Okay.
So anyways, there were actually four reactors in the plant.
Yep. 1, 2, and 3 were fine.
1, 2, and 3 in 1977, 78, and 81. Number 4 was the newest, built in 1983.
Being tested.
So it doesn't make sense to me that there were 4 of them and that they didn't all blow up, but that's cool. So this thing happened, and just like you said, it was because they were going to be doing this test. And if you watched the show or if you did any of the research or whatever, you'll find that this test was supposed to happen multiple times before. And for one reason or another, it didn't happen, or the test failed multiple times. Mm-hmm. And eventually it got to this point where they're like, we need to make this test happen. And Angry Mustache Man from the show's basically just like, hey, we're making this happen irregardlessly. Yes, irregardlessly.
That's one of Jay's most unfavorite
right?
words.
Irregardless. You mean the not words?
Yeah.
So there was a sudden and unexpected power surge that caused all the problems. And when they attempted to do the emergency shutoff, there was this huge power spike, and the power went out of control. And this is when all of the problems of the show happened.
Supposedly, too, there in mid-test, there was a shift change.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it's like you're doing this test that could literally blow up the place. And you're like, you know what? I'll see you later. Nicola, see you later. You know, I mean, how do you not have one shift to do it? Because apparently there was some miscommunication from shift to shift that actually happened as well that I read.
Yeah, so what was supposed to happen is that it was all supposed to take place in the morning shift. And things were being prepared at night or whatnot to get ready. And then they get a call from this power plant during the day that got shut down somewhere else in the Ukraine. It was off the grid, like something happened. And so they're like, hey, can you hook us up with a little bit? And they're like, okay, that's fine. And so some of the things changed that were going in the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl. And so the day shift wasn't able to actually complete the test and do the test that it was supposed to. So the shift is changing. The nighttime people come in and they're like, yeah, we're still doing this test, even though... So the people in the room will say, okay, we're aware that this test is going to happen. We're going to perform a test that we've never done before. But the people elsewhere in the plant didn't know what was going on. And so they end up going through with this test, even though they didn't have all of the proper setup in place, which is just mind-blowing. Again, with something this serious. And I will say a lot of them didn't know exactly how serious it is, but they knew it was really bad.
Yeah.
You can't give that as an out. Let's see here. So the procedure was supposed to go something like this. The reactor was to be running at a low power level, which it was, between 700 and 800 megawatts. Megawatts? Yeah, megawatts.
Yeah.
The steam turbine generator was to be run up to full speed. When these conditions were achieved, the steam supply for the generator was to be closed off. Turbine generator performance was to be reduced to determine whether it could provide the bridging power for the coolant pump until the emergency diesel generators were then up to speed and able to do this. And after the emergency generators reached normal operating speed and voltage, the turbine generator would be allowed to continue to cool down or to run down. And so the whole problem with this, we're like, okay, that sounds good. We have this plan in place. It's that whole step where is it? The generator performance was, the part where there's that time gap, where you're getting the backup generators up to speed, and there's this little break in the power.
Supposedly it was a minute.
Yeah, it was 60 to 75 seconds long that there was this almost like an outage of power. That's why these generators were needed. One of the things they didn't really factor in, though, is that those generators also take time to get up to speed and get things running. So you have this time frame where things just aren't running safely. A not so fun fact about all this, because let's be fair, there's no fun facts.
No,
right?
there isn't.
The Chernobyl power plant had been in operation for 2 years without the capability, and we're talking about this one, the 4, so the other ones were even longer, had been running for 2 years without the capability to ride through the first 60 or 75 seconds of total loss of electrical power, and therefore had no real safety feature in there.
That's crazy.
So this was years and years that this thing had been running, and if anything had gone wrong, this would have happened anyways. Yeah. So before we get into more of the details, let's take a break for this week's Luke's Rant.
Okay, so here's my rant. It's directly related to the HBO miniseries. So I heard about this, and I saw some previews for it, and then, again, not using your HBO Go account.
No.
I log in, I look at it, and they're speaking English.
The English, yes.
They're speaking.
That's the native tongue of Mother Russia.
With terrible Russian accents. I think you pointed out half of them sound like they're British more than they sound like they're Russian. And it's not that I want to read subtitles, but I feel like there's a whole nuance to this that is lost in this miniseries because they're speaking English. You know how it is, people from other countries, particularly Russia is one. When they talk, they sound angry all the time.
They do.
And I think
Germany.
I think that would have had some. Not that they didn't sound angry on the show, because they did.
They did.
but I think subtitles, it would have been better. And
I wouldn't have
liked
watched it. Yeah.
I wouldn't have liked it as much because I would have had to pay more attention, but I think they really but then the problem is, how do you get that many actors that speak fluent Russian or can learn Russian well enough to speak it and pull it off? So it was probably a combination of, it's an American audience that they're making this for. Finding Russian-speaking actors was going to be super difficult. But I really think, I mean, literally, English, really? They should have put some Russian in it at least.
They had a little bit. Very little.
Very
like the
little.
first 2 sentences.
Yeah.
So for all of you who write into Luke, make sure you write in Russian
Yes.
and send that
Cyrillic,
into him.
right? Isn't that their...
I have no idea.
I forget what the...
It's not Russian?
I forget what their the written language. It isn't Greek or... I forget. Never mind.
They write Greek?
I'm not... Be quiet.
We're moving on.
Moving on.
Okay, so things start going poorly during the test, Luke.
Yeah,
like,
poorly.
Super not well. The power levels are supposed to stay between what, like the 700, 800 range, like we were talking about. That's the exact noise it made. It went and dropped all the way down to about 30.
And it sounds like losing power would be a good thing, but it's not.
Yeah.
Like you would think, oh, the power's going down. It's like, no, the power's what keeps stuff cold.
So that's what gets kind of confusing, is that you would think it's kind of counterintuitive of what happened. And even why all the things went wrong is very counterintuitive. And that has to do with the reactor's production of a fission byproduct, xenon-135, which is no good. So, well, it is good sometimes, but not in this situation. So this is a reaction inhibiting neutron absorber. So good, right? Core power continued to decrease as this stuff kept sucking up neutrons, which wasn't something that the nuclear engineers there were taking into account or knew about, really. And so this was, as this continued to decrease, it's a process they call reactor poisoning. So in a steady state operation, this is avoided because xenon-135 is burned off as quickly as it's created.
But this time it wasn't.
Right, and because of the situation, it was not. And by absorbing all these neutrons of the outgoing chain reaction and becoming super highly stable xenon-136, that's what normally happens. Wasn't happening this time. With the reactor power down previously, high quantities of iodine-135 were decaying into neutron-absorbing xenon-135, and it produced a neutron flux during the burnout, which doesn't sound good.
That sounds terrible.
Right? So this is where you get into the maths.
You need that to happen for time travel.
You do. You do need it for time travel, Luke. Thank you. So this gets into where they start pulling all the control rods and things like that. 211 of the control rods actually had been extracted, which seems not super safe, including all but 18 of the, quote, fail-safe manually operated rods, which there's supposed to be a minimum of 28. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here, but I kind of want to talk about it in normal people terms.
Okay.
Because nobody here wants to hear about Xenon-135, right?
I have a fun fact.
Ooh, let's hear it.
I actually helped
design the reactor?
No. So I did work for a company that did nuclear reactor head upgrade packages. So they would take the head of the reactor off, they'd pull out all the control rods, and then they would have to move them around inside the facility and get new ones in. And
What?
I actually did a simulation, a mechanical simulation. No, not a mechanical, for clearance purposes. Whatever word it is. So there's no room in these reactor heads. So how do
Not
you,
real confident in your
like,
simulation.
How
at
do you
this
get
point.
these? How do you get these rods out of the core and then transport them and move them around the building? So I actually did like a kinematic study of pulling this out.
Oh,
You had to
cool.
turn it a couple degrees. You had to go down like a foot. You had to turn it 35 degrees, and then you could take it out the opening that they would cut in the reactor wall. So I did this for. I think I worked on that project for about 6 or 9 months, and we would build like walkways and bridges to get over, and they could like pivot and move, and all these cranes and gantries and stuff like that. It was actually very, very interesting stuff.
That is very
But
interesting.
me doing it,
Yeah.
nothing
You're
happened.
basically to blame for Chernobyl.
We're good.
We're good. A wink. A wink. All right. So when the reactor stopped making power, they decided to ramp up power production quickly. And you saw him yelling on the show, "Rah, rah, make me power now."
I think
Rah."
that's exactly what he
That's
said.
a quote, yeah. So this is supposed to happen over a day or longer. You're supposed to slowly ramp up this production. But he says, I want it all back now, and they yank all the control rods, right? This means that like there's nothing left to absorb the neutrons except for plain old water,
Nothing
not heavy
nothing
water,
there to control the
and the
reaction.
xenon. Now, when they put the control rods back down because the power starts getting out of control, that's kind of where things start getting into trouble. So in the show, they say, and this is kind of one of the funny parts, and I get it, the show has to kind of speed things along. They say the control rods are tipped with graphite, right? And so here I am thinking that they just have this big graphite chunk on the end of them, right? And so then when they slam them back in, that's the problem. Well, this is, and it seems stupid because they know that's bad, but that's not exactly what happens. But more on that in a second. So when you use normal water as the coolant, it's also absorbing neutrons, right? And so when you take out the control rods, you're just left with water, and it's still absorbing all sorts of neutrons. So this RBMK reactor, when the absorbing control rods are yanked out, it pulls up graphite rods to increase the reaction. Like you're moving these control rods out to make more power,
I
right?
gotcha.
And to help with that, you're bringing this graphite in to up the power, right? And so it's not like these things that were made for safety had a graphite tip, but as they're pulled out, another rod kind of replaces them, which is made of graphite.
Oh, I gotcha.
All right? So it's not like it's an arrow with a graphite tip. It's another rod altogether.
Gotcha.
And so basically, not only did they step off the brakes, but they stomped on the gas as well
All at the same
when
time.
they pulled out these control rods. Surprisingly, this wasn't the only problem. So the neutron flux that I mentioned a little bit ago, or the movement of neutrons throughout the reactor, was the biggest problem. So when you jam the control rods back in, so assume like all these neutrons are kind of like nice and level on the side, right? When you jam the control rods back in, it pushes the graphite rods back down, which makes sense, and it displaces the water at the bottom. And remember that there wasn't a whole lot of water left, right? So it's displacing the water at the bottom, meaning that there's absolutely nothing controlling the reaction at the bottom. All the water's moved. The safety rods were out of there. We had all of the 135 still going on, and there was just this giant spike of neutron flux, which was way past the design settings. And so apparently at this point, something broke because of all of the heat and everything going on, and the rods got stuck in the most dangerous position with part of that graphite rod still sticking out.
I gotcha.
And, well, the rest is history. Boo. So why did it explode? The water got so hot that it turned into what I quote as, this is a James technical term.
Let me hear it.
Super mega ultra pressurized steam.
Wow.
And that steam needed to go somewhere, and it just got so super mega ultra pressurized that's when it blew off that top and blew apart the reactor.
Okay.
Boom. That's the science of Chernobyl, Luke.
So there's a whole bunch of cover up for this thing too, unfortunately.
Isn't that crazy?
So again, this is during the Cold War, and they didn't. Apparently, Russia didn't want to seem weak, and they didn't want to seem like they didn't know what they were doing. So they basically denied this thing. And even after, so the morning of April 28th, so 2 days later, I think it was, in Sweden, the Forsmark nuclear power plant.
I like it.
They actually detected alarming levels of radiation. They thought it was their own plant, and they were able to determine based off of the isotopes and the signature of the radiation that it wasn't them. And they call up Russia and they say, "Hey, what's going on?" And Russia's like, "Yeah, we had a little bit of a problem. No big deal. It's under control." Meanwhile, people are dying. Plumes of radioactive smoke are going up in the air, and it literally took I think it was almost a week before publicly Russia actually admitted that there was this meltdown and the big explosion and the core was exposed and all this radiation was going up in the air. So they were actually really kind of tight-lipped about it. And again, Cold War era, you kind of would expect that to happen.
Well, yeah. And I thought it was interesting on the show. I thought they were just exaggerating when they were showing the ash kind of coming down on people and them catching it and whatnot. I believe that, but then they showed this giant glowing laser in the sky, and I'm like, okay, like we're signifying
Yeah.
here's where the explosion happened. Everyone thinks it's pretty. Oh no,
That actually
apparently that was a thing. And
Actually
that's like-
happened.
yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, there's the color is really specific. Couple other things. So this thing was hugely terrible. So within 3 months
That's true.
of the accident, a total of 31 people died from radiation exposure and other direct effects of the actual
Which is
disaster.
the number that the USSR/Russia, whatever, still claims.
Yeah.
Like that's the number of deaths caused by this
Yeah.
was 31.
But what they didn't do, so this was a study by another independent organization, not Mother Russia. So between 1991 and 2015, there was a study that as many as 20,000 cases of thyroid cancer were diagnosed in patients who were under the age of 18 in 1986. And based off of that study and that number of people, the incident of thyroid cancer for people living in that area under the age of 18 that are now, in their, 50s or whatever, is something like over 200% of like what the average is. Like it's crazy the number of people.
That's unbelievable.
Another fun, not so fun fact, there were 26 RBMK style reactors total that were commissioned, and actually 10 of them, some of them are identical. They're RBMK 1000s. They're identical to Chernobyl, are still in operation. Not all of them are identical, but there's 10 of them. Some are bigger, some are a little bit
And
smaller.
they did retrofit them.
They did.
Right?
They fixed them.
Okay.
So
Ish.
it won't be happening again.
Do you have anything about like the containment?
Yeah. So basically, right after the reactor happened, so the construction, it was about 2 months later after it happened, they had to start containing this thing. So basically, what they did was they built this giant concrete, they called it a sarcophagus, that went around this, and they finished it in about a year and a half or 2 years. Unfortunately, this was not done very well, and it was only going to last, 30 to 50 years. And based off of all the deterioration and weather and blah, 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 this thing was leaking radiation like crazy. So right about 1996, they had to do something to fix this. So if you think of this ginormous nuclear power plant, there's a big concrete dome encasing one of the reactors. Now they got to encase that with another one. So this thing is it's 25 tons.
Wow.
It's 165 meters long. It's a
Wow.
dome. So imagine like a big dome. It's 110 meters tall. It basically encapsulates the reactor and the sarcophagus, and it's movable. So this thing slides
It's
into
movable?
place. Yeah, it slides into place, and then there's a crane system. So what they have to do is they have to basically deconstruct the sarcophagus that's inside of it, get rid of and properly dispose of the radioactive material, and then start the decommission process of the rest of the stuff inside of it. It's crazy. So this one has a durability of supposedly 100 years. It can withstand winds of up to 332 kilometers per hour. It has an operating range of negative 35 degrees Celsius and 45 degrees Celsius. And it began about 20 years ago to build this thing, but it basically slides in place. It just finished recently, within the last few years,
yeah, I saw it's
2016,
just-
I think.
Yeah.
This thing slid in place, and it covers the entire thing,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
That's really cool.
And then one last thing, I know we're a little bit over.
Go for it.
But so how do they measure nuclear events? And there are 7 levels, 7 being the highest, obviously. It's considered a major event. And then you got serious, accident with wider consequences, accident with local consequences, yada, yada, yada. There have only been 2 number 7 or level 7 nuclear events. Chernobyl in 1986 and Fukushima in 2011. And now Fukushima was a totally different thing.
Right.
There was a tsunami, and that thing was there was nothing they could really do about that. And to put that into perspective, right here in Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island was actually a level 5. So that was
Wow,
an
that
incident
seems
with
pretty
local
high.
consequences.
Wow.
Because there was radioactive material released into the environment, they don't necessarily know the full impact.
Right.
So
Interesting. Two quick fun facts.
Shoot.
The other three reactors, 1, 2, and 3, in Chernobyl, continued to run. And they were only shut down in 2000, finally, which blows my mind how that was
How do you
possibly
work
a
there?
thing. I don't understand that. Chernobyl's still home to 600 or 700 people,
Yeah.
which is not a lot, but they still live there.
a lot of them work on the structure that
Oh, really?
contains it now. Yeah, the new sarcophagus, as they call it.
Yeah, and as I said, you can kind of go vacation there and take a tour of the exclusion zone, as they call it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's pretty cheap. Not that that should really be surprising, but it looked like it's about $100 a day to tour, which, you know, you go have fun doing that. I'm gonna stay here.
Yeah, I'm good.
I got a lot of other places on my list before
I'll watch.
Chernobyl.
I'll watch a miniseries about it
Yeah.
with people speaking English.
Yeah, well, hopefully people got something out of this and now know the true maths, sort of, behind Chernobyl.
I love these things because I remember this from my childhood. We've done this a couple of times. We have a couple of shows that reminded me of my childhood. I really remember this one vividly.
Yeah,
So,
I don't, but I'm glad you do.
okay.
All right, hopefully you learned something, and until next time.
See ya.